So I've started Pilates. Thank you. I appreciate the support. I'm exactly 6 months from being 40. Today is April 20th. I was born October 20th, 1985, and my 30s have been marked by learning a lot of things about myself that I did not previously know. I've tried cycling. I've tried yoga. I've tried CrossFit. I've hurt myself cycling. I've hurt myself in yoga, and I've hurt myself in CrossFit, right? But isn't this like part of getting older, that I'm learning as I get closer to 40 that I have some toxic traits that aren't quite serving me as well as they used to. It was like I think it was like my second week at CrossFit. And I walk into the gym, I'm like, all right, I got this. I'm looking around the gym going, I can beat all these people, right? You know CrossFitters. I mean, they've been doing this forever, right? So I line up next like the strongest guy in the gym, and we're like lifting weights off the floor. I don't even know what the lifts are called yet, but I'm like, I'm taking this guy on, right? And so he keeps putting on more weight, so I keep putting on more weight, and you'll be happy to know I kept up with him. He walked out of the gym. I was out for weeks, right? This is part of my issue, right? But we've been having this conversation over the last few weeks with this illustration to help us understand, to think about our lives like a trellis, right? Like a trellis is this structure that our lives grow through. And part of what I'm learning, and maybe you're learning, that sometimes there's parts of our trellis that isn't serving us anymore. Parts of our trellis that continues to cause problems in our lives over and over and over again. Like our calendar, right, is a trellis. How we spend our money, our bank account is a trellis. Our social lives, how we think about how we hang out with people and when we hang out with people and who we hang out with is a trellis. I think sometimes the way we manage our pain can be a trellis. The ways in which we maybe hide our shame can be a trellis. The hurt we have in our past can affect how we live and how we respond to people. It's a trellis in our lives. So the question, I think, is not whether or not you have a trellis. It's whether or not you can admit it. Can you look at the trellis of your life and assess it? To consider what might need to change, what might need to be different. I think this is a lot of what the gospel texts are about. You know, in the Bible, there's these 4 books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are all fellows who walked with Jesus, spent about 3 years with Jesus, and began writing down afterwards some of the things that they wanted to pass on about Jesus. And in most of these gospel texts, their relationship to Jesus starts with Jesus inviting them to follow him. Like, hey, why don't you come with me on this journey? Why don't you rearrange your calendar, your trellis, for this next season of life and see what might happen? Now, as we read the Gospels, right, we're kind of reading it like these gospel writers are like our concierge to Jesus, right? Like you're meant to kind of see yourself in the text a little bit. What would it have been like if I was there? And these gospel writers help us do this. And so as Jesus invites the earliest disciples to rearrange their lives to center Jesus for a while, we're kind of invited to do the same thing as we read. And as these disciples find out as they walk with Jesus, that Jesus wanted to put his finger on more than just the calendar part of their trellis. That Jesus wanted to change their worldview, how they treated other people, how they looked at the world. Jesus wanted to maybe change the things that they thought were important. He wanted to have them shift some of even the ways in which they practice in their religious life. And as we read the Gospels, the same questions emerge for us as well. Now, this Sunday celebrates the resurrection of Jesus when everything changes in the story. It changes for those disciples that day as well. Actually, the story, when the resurrection of Jesus happens, you begin to kind of watch person after person after person have this epiphany. See, many of the people in the gospel text, their experience with Jesus is that Jesus is just trying to change their individual trellis, right? That Jesus has something to say about how you live your life. And as a reader, you get drawn up into that as well. But when the resurrection happens, there's this giant epiphany that it's actually not about you. It's not about you. Now, it has implications in your life. But what Jesus is working on is not just one trellis. That's not just your trellis. But there's this entire garden. Like there's this whole ecosystem that Jesus calls the kingdom of God. And when Jesus resurrects from the dead, those disciples, they start going, oh, that's what he meant by that teaching. That's why he had us sit with our enemies. That's why he healed that woman. He's trying to help us see this bigger picture of the kingdom of God that he's bringing to light. It's for you, but it's not about you. That Jesus is building this larger ecosystem. You are part of it, but there are many, many parts. I've had the privilege in my life of traveling a fair amount. I spent a good chunk of my life traveling all over. I've been in like every state in America, and I've been traveling down a little bit into South America. And I'm learning about myself now as I get older. I get a little grumpy about like tourist experiences. Anybody else? Like we went to Florida and like, oh, you gotta go to Disneyland. I did not like Disneyland. I don't get the allure of stepping into a magical land where everything is about who? You. They gear the whole experience to fabricate experience for me. But my favorite memories from traveling this great country have been some of the more local experiences I've stumbled upon. It was about a decade ago, I was with some friends in Spearfish, South Dakota. It's in like the West Black Hills of South Dakota. And it was like 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and we're walking around exploring parts of Spearfish, and we ended up upon this little Irish pub. And when I say little, it was like no bigger than this stage I'm standing on. And the bar took up half the pub, right? The bar came all the way out into the middle. And so we walk in here, and it's 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and the place is packed, right? And we walked in, and everyone kind of looks at us like, oh, you're not a part of the Tuesday 3 o'clock pub crowd, right? Like, you're not from around here, are you, right? But no, but at this point, you're like already in the door, right? And so we walk in, and people were cordial with us, but so we end up sitting up at the bar, and there's this giant like spin wheel behind the bar, the kind of like tick, 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 those ones, right? It's like the little games. And so we're trying to warm up to the bartender a little bit, like, hey, like, what's the wheel for? Like, well, you can put $5 on the table, and you get to spin the wheel. And on the wheel, the little triangle pizza slices are like, one of them is like, you're going to sing an Irish song. Or you're going to like dance an Irish jig, like these are the kind of things on this wheel. And I'm like, all right, I'm in. So $5 on the table, slide it across, spin the wheel. My buddies are like $5 on the table. So we're all spinning this wheel, right? I don't even remember which one of us hit the jackpot, but we spun the wheel, and the jackpot was everyone in the bar gets a Guinness, right? And so the final spinner comes up, and it's pop, 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 pop. And the place erupts. Like, people are so excited. All of a sudden, we're in. Like, we're all the way in. And we get invited to some moment, and everyone gets a Guinness, and by the end, everybody's singing the Irish jig, right? And I think these moments are powerful because, like, although, like, the point of an establishment like this is it's for me. But there's something so much larger going on in these moments, right? There's this community that surrounds this place. There's this culture that lives in this place that we got to participate and be invited in. I get to step into a reality so much bigger than me, but somehow met me right where I was. I think this is the story of the resurrection. This is how the resurrection works in our lives. This is how the resurrection has changed and formed my life. I've shared with our church many times, but I come from generations of addiction and abuse. And when I was 7 years old, our family kind of had this radical conversion, and all the alcohol like came out of our house, and God really like healed our family of so many different wounds. But I have this like memory of when the last bit of liquor came out of my house. We were kind of preparing to move. We had to get out of town and find some new rhythms of life. And we lived in rural Prince Edward Island, Canada, and there was this like big field behind our house. And on this day, the farmer was out in the field driving like a combine, like one of those big tractor things. I don't know what they're called. I got an urban kid, right? So, and my mom found it was a beer in the back of the fridge. And she's like, hey, like, why don't you run this out to the farmer? It's a hot day. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. So in my hand is the last bit of liquor leaving our house. And I go out to the field to the farmer. I'm like, this is such a cool tractor, you know? And I'm like, hey, do you want a beer? And he's like, oh yeah. So I hand him the beer, and like, I don't know what like drinking and driving laws are on the farm. It was a different time. It was the 90s, you know, like there was a lot going on. And he has that beer. And you know, for that farmer, right, it's a cold beer on a hot day. But there was a much larger story going on, wasn't there? For our family, it was the last bit of liquor coming out of our house. It marked a change, a major step in healing, a change that would affect now me and my children and their children too. See, sometimes there's these moments where resurrection meets us in them, like a cold beer on a summer afternoon. But there's a bigger story that we get invited to participate in. It wasn't long after that, we moved to central Canada to kind of start a new life together, and we ended up at this little church called Streetsville Baptist Church. I don't even know how we ended up at this little church called Streetsville Baptist Church, but this very wounded, kind of limping family showed up at the door of this church one day. And this church just like took us in and loved us and cared for us and invited us into their homes and fed us meals and walked with us in this really vulnerable season. And I think now as an adult about that, as someone who spends a lot of time about how churches can be healthy, right? And I think about the years of formation that church must have went through to be able to do that. The amount of times they practiced loving each other so that years later a family like ours could just show up there and they'd know what to do. Building the capacity to love and care for people coming from the margins of life. For them, it was just a day. But for us, there was a much larger story going on. See, the resurrection of Jesus has huge implications in our world, but somehow meets us right where we are, inviting us then into a life of exploring these implications together. In the Gospels, there's a few different accounts of Jesus' resurrection. We're going to look at maybe two of them today. One of them is in the book of Luke. Now, Luke's gospel primarily centers this person named Peter. Peter was to be the leader in the early church. And so Luke is often telling stories through the experience, or at least how he observed them, of Peter. Now, the story of resurrection begins actually with these women who were friends of Jesus who go to the tomb to like help take care of the body. And Luke's account says that when they get to the tomb is empty. Jesus is not there. And they're very concerned. Like, has the body been stolen? Like, where did it go? And this is what happens. There's this angel, this being that appears to the women that day. And in Luke chapter 24, this is what the angel says to them. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do you look for the living among the dead? And if you were reading Luke's gospel up to this point, you'd be in it, right? You'd be starting to pick up on all the ways that this gospel is inviting us into this story and into this question. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do we keep looking for life, scrolling our X feed or Instagram accounts? Why do I keep looking for life in our country's politics? Why do I keep looking for life in my successes? Why do I keep looking for life in that toxic relationship over and over and over again? Why do I keep looking for life by practicing religion and trying to do it just the right way and check all the boxes? Why do I keep looking for life by trying to suppress my anger or hide my hurt or cover up my pain so that no one can see? Why do I keep looking for life among the dead when these things in our lives, after almost 40 years, I'm seeing just keep producing death, right? Why do we keep looking for life among the dead? These women that day run back to Peter. Say, Peter, the body's gone. It's missing. Peter's like, what? Right? He takes off running and gets to the tomb. It says in Luke 25, says Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home amazed at what happened. He saw these cloths, these death clothes just laying all over the tomb, and he goes home amazed at what happened. Now, he's not met the resurrected Jesus yet, but there was something about seeing those clothes in the tomb that made him amazed. Now, I think you could read this like amazed at what happened, like, wow, like, the body's gone, right? But I think what's going on here is he's amazed at what's happened. He's amazed at the last 3 years and the epiphanies that now are arising as he looks at this empty tomb. And he starts to realize all these memories. Like, that's why Jesus taught us like that. That's why he asked us that question. That's why he invited us to sit at that table. That's why he talked to us after that healing and explained everything to us. This is why all this time I thought it was just about me. But in this moment, he's like, whoa, there's this cosmic reality going on at the resurrection of Jesus, that death doesn't win, but life does. And that changes everything. He walks home amazed at what happened and is able to leave that clothing of death behind. See, this is the great claim of the Gospels, is that you can build your life around this trellis modeled in the life of Jesus. A trellis that does not lead to death, but conquers death over and over and over again and produces life and healing and a love for others and a greater capacity to be in community. It produces all this beautiful fruit to feed and nourish the world and the people around us. Now, if you know the Gospels, there's other accounts. There's this account in the book of John. I like this account a lot. I like the book of John a lot. The book of John is written after the other accounts. And in many ways, John's book is an attempt to maybe fill in some of the gaps that the other Gospels have missed. Or John's like, but there was this thing going on at that same moment. And so John fills in some of these holes for the readers. In John's account in verse 20, it goes like this. It says, early in the morning on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Now, if you're reading the book of John, you begin to pick up that John refers to himself as the other disciple. So rather than referring to himself in the first person, he often refers to the other disciple, which is him, John, the author of this book, right? So Mary goes to Peter and the other disciple, and then he says, the one whom Jesus loved, John, letting everyone know that him and Peter are there. Peter, who the other gospel centers, is there with the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved. You think there was drama in the early church? Might have been. And said, they've taken our Lord from the tomb and we don't know where they've put him. Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter. They were running together, but the other disciple, the author of this book, ran faster than Peter. Peter has a lot going for him right now. He's the leader of this early church. He's got a lot of great qualities. However, he's not a great runner, okay? This other disciple was the first to arrive at the tomb. Bending down and take a look, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other clothes, but it was folded up in its own place. Then the other disciple, just one more reinforcement here, the one who arrived at the tomb first. This is a really important point. John really thinks this is missing from the other three gospels, okay? He got there first. He also went inside. He saw and he believed. He saw and he believed. John is setting up this kind of maybe understanding about how belief works. That he saw something and he believed. Now we read this in like a post-enlightenment mind, right? That like he saw some evidence with his eyes and now he believes with his head the resurrection has happened. But we also know that seeing and believing doesn't only happen that way, right? That sometimes we see things like we become awakened to them. That we used to see things one way, and now we see them another. That we used to understand things one way, and now we understand them another. And this is how belief works too, right? Like there's a belief that's like, I've looked at the evidence and now I believe. But there's also this belief that's like in our guts, right? Like a belief that is from a different place than our heads. Like when you know that you know something. Like I can't explain to you all of the reasons I know this to be true. I just know it to be true. That we see and we believe in a lot of different ways. Again, these disciples, they've not seen the resurrected Jesus yet. But when they saw the tomb, they saw and they believed. There's this connectedness between seeing and believing when it comes to faith. It includes all of it. That we see with our hearts and our lives, right? That we believe with our hearts and our lives. A couple weeks ago, we had a community conversation, let's call it, about suffering here on a Sunday morning. And my friend Dwayne came up and we sat in these chairs together. And Dwayne is in and has been for years in a season of suffering. He said to me on the platform a couple weeks ago, he said, without God, I can't. And without me, he won't. I can't get this quote out of my head. Without God, I can't. And without me, he won't. I think it speaks to something about how seeing and believing works. There's a part of this that is God coming and maybe helping you see and understand in a different way. Sometimes it's a sense deep in our soul. But there's this agency that we have that God will not forcibly take from us. And there's this invitation in the Gospels and the New Testament then to somehow respond to seeing and believing in the resurrection with our hearts and our lives. That everyone I know who walks with Jesus today, my experience in life is that this journey starts with something very simple, right? Just accepting the hospitality of Jesus in our lives by inviting Jesus in and acknowledging him and his presence and his desire to be with us and walk with us. But if you read the story of the Gospels, that's not where it ends, is it? Then there's this life. There's this trellis. There's this movement through the rest of our lives where Jesus begins to change sometimes the way we think about things like our calendars and our resources, our finances. Changes how we might think about when we might want to tell the truth or not tell the truth. He changes the kind of people that maybe we're willing to sit at a table with, sometimes even with our enemies. There's parts of this journey where we learn how to pray and then sometimes learn how to pray again. Right? This lifelong journey of sitting around tables and having these new stories shape us and some of these old stories that shape us being moved somewhere else. That there's this lifelong journey of following and walking with Jesus that sure begins with receiving the hospitality of Jesus, but that's not where it ends. It's a whole life of participating in the resurrection. And I thought that would be a great place to end an Easter Sunday sermon. And a couple weeks ago, I'm working on this message and I'm praying, and I felt like God began to speak to me. I don't know if you've experienced that before. It doesn't happen to me all the time. I'm not that guy, but I began to feel like God speak to me like, I want you to give people an opportunity to mark this moment and accept this faith, this hospitality of Jesus into their lives. Now, I grew up as an evangelical kid in the 90s, and so I have all kinds of baggage around people like me standing on stage trying to get kids to make a decision and pray this thing they used to call the sinner's prayer, right? You'd ask Jesus into your heart, you're good to go, right? And so I'm like, God, no thanks. And God's like, no, like I want you to do this. And I was like, no, like it's good. I already have a great spot to land. People will feel good. They'll feel uplifted. They'll go on with their day and life. And eventually, God just gently kept insisting that this is what I was supposed to do. And so I don't know if this is for you. If I'm being really honest, if it's not, and this doesn't go well, like I guess that's God's problem now. But I wrote this prayer for us on this Easter Sunday. It goes like this: Jesus, I return my life to you. I return my life to you. It just out of the gate acknowledges that life has been given to us by God, that we come from the source. Jesus, I return my life to you. I acknowledge my need for you. I keep trying to lift the same amount of weight as this guy over here, and I keep hurting myself. I keep trying to go all in all the time and win at everything I do, and it's not working out for me. I acknowledge my need for you. Awaken my heart and my life. I would love a different outlook on life than the one I'm currently carrying. And lead me in your ways. I acknowledge there's this like life lived after making a decision like this. And in the power of your resurrection, I pray. This is not like a kind of woo-woo prayer. This is not like a self-help kind of moment. It's recognizing that thousands of years ago, this man resurrected from the dead, and that death does not win. And that's the kind of power I need in my life if I'm going to live out the first 4 lines. In the power of resurrection, I pray, amen. And just because I'm difficult, I wanted to kind of put another layer in here. If this prayer is for you today, if this is a moment that you want to mark today with this prayer, I want to invite you to text the word Jesus to this number on the screen. And a human, actually either me or Amy, who was standing up here earlier, or Pastor Josh, who was standing here earlier, or Carrie, who was standing here earlier, one of the 4 of us will get with you and respond to your text and help you maybe walk out the life part of this. If you want to mark this moment, if this prayer is a moment for you today, I want you to text the word Jesus to this number. And I'm actually going to give us 30 seconds or so just to read this prayer in our hearts. And in that 30 seconds, it's totally appropriate to whip out your phone and text the word Jesus to this number. Let's take a few moments and just let this prayer settle into our lives. If this moment is your moment, I want you to know that you don't pray these words alone. That actually, I know personally a lot of people in this room that are living this out, working, trying to live this out in their lives every day. And so if this is your life, right, if this prayer is kind of how you live, I'm going to invite you to pray this out loud with me. And if this is your moment, you can just kind of join that group of people in saying these words. So if you wouldn't mind, those of you that this resonates with you, to say these words out loud with me. Jesus, I return my life to you. I acknowledge my need for you. Awaken my heart and my life and lead me in your ways. In the power of resurrection, I pray. Amen.